Gareth speaking, hello? Yeah, I'm good, how are you? They've done what?
I dig your smile. I'm Gareth Dunn. Welcome to the Labour Relations Roundup.
In the past 2 weeks, there's been some very exciting changes coming to light in British Columbia, specifically in relation to the Labour Relations Code. The bill that's had its first reading is called Bill 10-2022. This bill seeks to do two things. I'm just going to tackle one of the things today because there's a lot to unpack. Now, what the first part of the bill seeks to do is change the way in which employees form a union. By doing so, there is, in my view, going to be a massive impact to business and labour in the province. To understand what is changing, we first have to look at what currently happens in the process. So how do employees go from not being represented by a union to being represented by a union? The process of forming a union or unionizing is a two-step process currently. The end result is either a union is formed and the Labour Board certifies the union, or there isn't, and they don't certify a union. The first step is that the union gets employees to sign cards. Sometimes it is called carding, and it shows whether or not an individual supports the union. The Labour Board requires that at least 45% of the workforce sign these cards to begin the certification process. Once the Labour Board is satisfied that the union has met the 45% minimum threshold, they will then schedule a secret ballot vote within the next 5 days. Within this time frame, the union and the employer campaign hard. The union is telling employees that they'll be better off forming a union and that they'll have better working conditions being part of a union. The employer, on the other hand, is campaigning that the employees don't need a union to represent them, that they've always listened to them, and that the best deal they could have is dealing directly with their employer and not through a union. Typically, the union would seek out information about management. They would find pain points like unfair scheduling or choosing individuals based on preference for them instead of years of service or favoritism in the workplace. These kinds of things, that find pain points like that, or payroll issues, or just managers that are not being very nice. On the other hand, the employer would come back and say, well, guys, the union can't promise you anything. We can fix any issues you have. So just come to us, and we've got an open door policy. We're more than happy to resolve any problems you may have. It's a very sticky situation that has a ton of pitfalls and can often lead to hot water at the Labour Board. One wrong sentence and an employer can be hauled in front of the Labour Board and accused of an unfair labour practice. Here is another key term in labour relations. What constitutes an unfair labour practice? The Labour Board broadly defines an unfair labour practice as a practice where coercion or intimidation has taken place. So you're forcefully trying to make people choose a certain side. Some common ones are threatening or dismissing employees because they support the union, changing employees' terms or conditions of employment while there's an organization or organizing drive taking place. Employers can be sucked into an unfair labor practice by simply saying things like, well, we might look at shipping the work overseas, or an implied threat or an indirect threat can often get you in hot water. You've got to be very careful. Even a simple question like asking an employee whether or not they support the union is not allowed. Even so much as putting the union in a negative light could be seen as an unfair labour practice. So what happens if the Labour Board finds an unfair labour practice has been committed? The Labour Board has been known to reinstate employees that have been terminated if they can establish that they were terminated because of the organisation drive or because of the union affiliation that they may hold. They may order that the party who's done the wrongdoing stop what they're doing and may order compensation for whoever's been hurt. They could really just order the certification of the union if they find an egregious act by an employer. They could also refuse to recognize the cards that have been signed by the employees for the union if they find that the union's been intimidating employees into signing cards. In my experience, it's much more likely that the employer is going to be on the wrong side of an unfair labor practice. Unions certify employers all the time, and they're very, very well versed, and they have special departments. A lot of the big ones will have special departments that deal specifically with certifying employers. They know what they're doing for the most part, and where employers, how often are you going to get a certification drive? It depends on what industry, but the reality is that the unions often know their way around the law on this stuff much more than employers do. Oftentimes employers can react too quickly when there's a union drive taking place, and before they've had time to consult a labor professional or a lawyer, they've said something, or a supervisor said something, and it's going to turn on you very quickly. So make sure you reach out early if you're in that problem. So the next piece in the puzzle is the secret ballot that's conducted by the Labour Board. While the vote's taking place by the Labour Board, so they'll send that representative, the union and the employer send a representative as well to make sure that everything is on the up and up, and that there's no coercion, intimidation, or whatever else happening at the time of the vote. So in summary, the two-step process is card 45% of the employees you want to unionize, and then go through the campaigning process, try not to get a bad faith complaint, or an unfair labor practice complaint, and then you have the secret ballot vote. If that secret ballot vote comes back as positive for the union, the board then orders certification and you begin bargaining with the union. So now that we've gone through the process as it stands today, what is Bill 10 going to change? Instead of the two-step process, there's now going to be two pathways to forming a union. They sound the same, but they're very different. The first path is that the union needs to sign cards of 55%, so not 45, 55% of the employees, and the board will automatically grant the certification at that point. No longer a vote needed. The second path is if the union is only able to get 45 to 55% of the vote. The Labour Board will then issue the secret ballot vote in order to determine the true intentions or wishes of the employees. So what does this mean for employers? Well, you no longer have the chance to complain. By the time you figure out that the union's been knocking on the door, they probably have most of their cards signed and well on their way to 55%. I think this is going to make it a lot easier for unions to certify employees. It is absolutely crucial for employers that are trying to stay union-free to keep their ear to the ground, to make sure you're listening to employees, to make sure there is no room for a union to gain any traction in your business if that's your goal in this. Having said that, that should be an absolute no-brainer in the current climate we work in, given the low unemployment rate, and that, you got to treat employees really well so they don't leave. Good employees are leaving companies at alarming rates, simply because everyone needs good employees and there's just not enough of them. So what does this mean for unions? I would say for the most part, it's going to be really good for unions. They only have to get 55% of people to card. The other 45% are irrelevant at this point. It doesn't matter what those people want. As long as you get that 55%, you've got the union in. I would also say that because the campaigning piece is removed, 45% of the employees may have no idea that there's even a union certification going on. That could cause infighting. It could cause an increase in decertification. But we're just going to have to see how this whole thing plays out. So what does this mean for both sides? I think there's going to be a lot of unfair labor practice accusations flowing from both sides. Employers saying our guys weren't fully informed. The union saying we need to include these people. The employer saying we need to exclude these people. Then where's the 55%? What if the Labour Board jumps the gun on the 55%? And then the union challenges some of the cards saying these people don't work here anymore, or they've been terminated and are awaiting arbitration, or whatever it may be. So what happens if the certification's already been ordered based on the cards? What happens then? The reversal of a certification? These are all things we don't know yet. What happens if the union makes false claims? We know that right now, an unfair labor practice could result in the tearing up of cards. But what if the certification's already been issued? And that's the whole purpose of the bill, is to speed up the time that it takes to certify employees. So what's the penalty? In uncertain times like we're facing right now, unions can often offer that certainty. And if I was a betting man, I would say the unions are going to be on the rise in the next couple of years because of how uncertain the labor market is right now, because of COVID, because everyone is fighting for labor. I think it's a pretty easy ground to see. It's an easy trajectory to see there's going to be a lot of union movement in the next couple of years. I hope you enjoyed this video. If there's a couple terms that you didn't understand, hit me in the comments. I'd love to explain them. If you want to know more about labor relations, I did an intro video as my first one, just giving the general concept. So if some things were a little bit confusing here, go ahead and watch that one. And I'm going to continue to make these, so please comment and tell me if there's something you want me to dive into, if there's a certain issue you're facing. I'd love to be able to talk about that. So thanks so much, and please hit the like and subscribe. Cheers.